dangerous encounter.
Unbelievable video.
It's road rage out of control.
He's trying to fight us.
With innocent people in danger.
I got a kid. I have a baby. He just hit us.
It's just a recipe for disaster.
Knocked him off the bike.
Holy. Give me the gun.
And later, a friendly encounter at a gas station takes a terrifying turn.
Yeah, nice.
I was like, I need to fix this situation.
This is why they say don't mess with Texas.
This is a Thanksgiving travel nightmare.
A dangerous road rage attack in Texas unfolding in real time.
Hey, chill out, bro.
It's 2 days before Thanksgiving 2019. And 35 miles north of Houston, Texas, Interstate 59 is jammed with holiday travelers.
It was the rush hour traffic, very busy on the interstate.
Just before the Splendora exit, a young couple changes lanes. In the process, they accidentally cut off an SUV, and the driver has an immediate, angry reaction.
He starts to throw bottles. He's cursing, he's screaming. He stops even paying attention to the road.
The couple is in shock. Suddenly, they are smack in the middle of an ugly road rage situation. And even more frightening, they have a baby in the back seat.
One driver thinks that they've been wronged. The other driver is trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and I got to get my family away from this.
Alarmed, the couple dials 911.
Montgomery County 911, what is the location of your emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I am on 59, and there is a Tahoe stopping in front of me and throwing stuff out the window.
And now they're
speeding. And
he
just hit my car.
He's having a road rage accident.
Things quickly escalate.
He's trying to fight us and hit us with his car and stuff.
Actually swerved over into his lane, clipped the right front passenger fender of the vehicle.
And I have it all on video.
The couple is so shaken, they start recording on their phone. But that only makes the driver even more furious.
Nobody likes to have a recording device shoved in their face when they're already aggravated and irritated.
When people are engaged in road rage, when they know they're being videotaped, that makes them even angrier and even more impulsive. So that actually escalated the situation. He's hanging out the window, he's swerving across the lanes. He's so focused on this driver who's taping him that he's putting everyone's life in danger.
Now, things are really heated.
The drivers are yelling back and forth.
Hey, chill out, bro. I got a kid. I got a kid. I have a kid. I have a baby.
This continues for several miles.
We have a baby in the car and they're yelling at us on the highway. Okay.
The 911 dispatcher pleads with the young couple to keep their family safe.
Can y'all stay in y'all's vehicle and not fight?
But then, things get downright scary.
This is insane.
And he just hit a motorcycle.
He just hit
a motorcycle.
He just hit a guy on a motorcycle.
God, he knocked him off the bike.
Holy.
What the?
I don't know that I stopped.
Oh
He wants to fight us.
Man,
He's trying to fight us. He just
I don't know if I stopped.
Right now, we're on the highway.
he just ran him over with being a road rage.
Oh, you're crazy.
He swerved across 2 lanes of the interstate and he clipped the motorcycle, which caused the rider of the motorcycle to hit the ground, flip.
Now, multiple panicked calls come into 911.
He's road rage. They just hit his motorcycle and knocked him over and over. Okay, man, listen to me. Calm down for me, okay?
A car and a motorcycle collision has just happened. He hit the damn bike, not looking, and hit him and fell, but they're all stopped here.
Both cars involved in the road rage pull over. But just when it looks like this situation might finally calm down, both drivers step out of their cars.
Now these drivers are out of their vehicles and they're face to face.
And that's when things take an even more frightening turn.
Give me the gun.
Someone has a gun.
That's a deadly mixture for a disastrous outcome.
For J.C. Burrows, disaster comes out of nowhere.
I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
He's just riding his motorcycle home from work, looking forward to Thanksgiving.
I was about 2 miles from home, 10 minutes or less to walking in the door.
And then, as he approaches an exit, he's blindsided. Caught right in the middle of the road rage feud as the SUV slams into him.
I couldn't avoid it. If I would have seen it ahead of time, then I could have got away from it, but I didn't even know that was even going on because they were coming up behind me.
And after he's flipped onto the ground, JC is a crumpled mess.
When it threw me off, all I did was ball up in a ball and just rolled. When I hit the ground, I throwed my arms up to protect my face, and that's how I got all the road rash on my hands and my arms.
JC doesn't know what is happening, but he can tell that the driver who hit him is stressed.
All he kept saying was, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, I'm sorry.
With police on the way, JC calls his wife to let her know what's going on.
The fire department showed up, a bunch of cops. Then my wife showed up. When she walked up to me, she leaned over and tapped me on the head and said, "You scratched the bike." I kind of laughed at her. She knew I was going to be all right then. It could have been way worse.
Luckily, JC is okay. But when police arrive, they find themselves in the midst of a tense situation.
Not only did you have the people that were involved in this road rage incident, you have family members that are right on scene. And so very quickly, you go from 6 people to 10 people to 15 people to 20 people, and it's just adding to the chaos.
The 2 furious drivers who were involved in the road rage seem oblivious to anything but their own anger.
They were still going at each other. Neither one of them seemed like they were concerned with Mr. Burris, who was laying on the ground. We had to separate them.
Hey, back up. Back up.
Despite one of the drivers threatening to pull out a gun.
Give me the gun.
That fortunately never actually happens.
I think it was just kind of a scare tactic to try to get him to back off, but no shots were fired at anybody.
Still, the situation is clearly volatile. And when police try to talk to the drivers, they point the finger at each other. It's not until they look at the young couple's cell phone video
Well, I do have the video of what happened right here.
that they're able to piece it all together.
That video right there is very incriminating.
The driver of the SUV, Armando Montez, is arrested.
Mr. Montez was placed in custody for assault with a deadly weapon, and he was also charged with child endangerment.
And as the video makes the news and goes viral, there's a shocking revelation. It turns out the young couple were not the only ones who had a child in the car.
The couple screaming they had a child in the car. Police say so did he.
Authorities say that Montez had his wife and 7-year-old child in the car with him at the time.
We had no idea that there was a 7-year-old child in Mr. Montez's vehicle until we actually had been there for several minutes trying to sort things out.
There were children in the back seats of each of those vehicles, 2 fathers facing off.
The young couple who recorded the road rage incident is not charged. But Montez is sentenced to 4 years in prison.
He was sentenced in July of 2021 for charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
JC, the motorcyclist who got caught up in it all, is lucky to be alive.
Splendora police say it is miraculous that the motorcyclist involved in this incident survived.
I had to have surgery done on my right hand, so I missed Thanksgiving. Then at Christmas time, I had to go back in because I got a bad infection. I could not use my hands at all, and I was in physical therapy for almost 4 months.
And he thinks the sentence Montez got is much too light.
I think he got off real easy with it, and it should have been a harsher charge.
This could have been far worse. He could have killed someone.
On social media, people are divided. Many say both drivers should have been punished. But JC says the most important lesson for all of us is to never allow road rage to get the best of you.
It's not worth it. You don't know this person's got family and they're going home to family, and you could take all that away from them so quick.
We live in a crazy world where too many people do crazy things, and it's not worth it, especially when children are involved, and just too many things can go wrong.
In another part of Texas, when things get crazy at a gas station, an unexpected hero jumps into action.
Yeah, nice.
June 26th, 2015. Midlothian, Texas, just after 6 a.m. Firefighter Daniel Gaske is heading to work at the Mansfield Fire Department. On the way, he makes a pit stop at a local gas station convenience store.
Every shift, I stop there in the morning and grab a couple snacks and, a drink. Typically, my window in this gas station is no more than 3 to 4 minutes.
As a regular, Daniel has become friendly with the store clerk.
It's just I got to know her from me stopping in.
Usually they make small talk and Daniel is out the door. But on this Friday morning, everything changes.
This guy decided to change it up a little bit. I was half asleep, so I didn't see this guy come in right there at the door. He walked in and I didn't even pay attention until he had his hand on me and moved me.
The man tries to shove Daniel out of his way. But why?
I was tense because someone's touching me that I don't know. And so I step back and look him up and down, who is this guy touching me? And I don't know what was going on in his mind.
And what this man does next is terrifying.
He pulls out the hunting knife. 6 to 7 inch hunting knife. I would say 2 to 2.5 inches thick and wide. It was big enough to be intimidating for sure.
Daniel is in shock. This is a robbery. And the knife-wielding man is demanding cash from the clerk.
He's telling her, hey, I don't want any trouble. I just want the money in the cash register.
This clerk is terrified. One minute she's chatting with, a really friendly customer, Daniel, who she knows very well. The next minute she's being threatened with a large knife.
But what this robber doesn't know is that the customer he pushed aside isn't just any customer. He's a firefighter, former high school athlete, and Marine who served in Iraq.
I don't like to think of myself as an overly intimidating guy, but I'm a pretty good sized guy. Most people, I think, would look at someone of my size and build and go, maybe I should hold off on this. I don't know who this guy is.
You've got to have a lot of audacity to shove past a man that large. And Daniel is a Marine, trained to have cat-like reflexes.
Also, being a Marine and being a fireman, he's there to protect everyone. It's instinct for him to do the right thing.
And now that he sees the store clerk is in trouble, Daniel isn't having it.
Instantly, I was like, okay, this guy already made a horrible decision by touching me, and now this girl's a friend of mine. So I need to fix this situation.
Daniel eyes the man carefully before making his move.
I take advantage of him not paying attention to me.
He's calculating. He's sizing this guy up, trying to figure out what's his best way to take this guy down. He makes note of which hand the weapon's in. Whatever move he's gonna do, he must maintain control of that hand.
And I go around his neck and I flip him over and take him to the ground.
As the frightened clerk watches helplessly, Daniel instructs her to call the police.
I yell at her to call 911.
911 is the location of the emergency. 9th Street, Midlothian, there's a robbery. Do you have a suspect? They got him on the ground. Please hurry.
With police now on the way, Daniel manages to keep both himself and the clerk out of immediate danger.
I was able to get the knife away from him and move it away out of his reach.
But this robber isn't giving up.
He started struggling with me. He was medium build, probably about 170 pounds and 5'8", so he's got meat on him. He could put up a fight.
Is the guy giving him a problem? He keeps saying to let him go, but that ain't gonna happen.
It seemed like he was trying to go for the knife still.
This is scary.
Daniel knows he has very little options. He uses his own body as a weapon to hold this man down, and that has a lot of risk involved. You don't know how desperate he is. You don't know if he has another weapon. You could get hurt, you could lose your life.
But Daniel has this robber firmly pinned to the ground. And because of his training, he's pretty confident he's got this.
Before the military, wrestling was a big sport of mine. Going from wrestling into the Marine Corps, where they teach you hand-to-hand combat and to force your enemy to move in positions that are uncomfortable for them while gaining the advantage and getting in a position that's comfortable for you. So for me, the best option was to get him to the ground as fast as possible.
Still, there's no sign of anyone showing up to help Daniel. And he's been holding this guy for more than 5 minutes.
That can seem like an eternity. This assailant can get a second wind, and maybe he starts to panic. He wants to fight because he knows that he's about to lose his freedom if he gets caught.
Do you see the officer pull the rough? I don't see anybody yet. They should be there any minute.
Where are the police? And how long can Daniel keep this angry robber at bay?
This is a dangerous situation.
As Daniel holds down the robber, it feels like it's taking forever for help to arrive. But he's determined not to let this man get away.
I would put pressure on his shoulder to where it felt like it was going to pop out. And you do that to anybody and they're done. And I was like, okay, you understand, I got you tamed, you're done. You're not going anywhere. And he's like, yes, I understand.
This is why they say don't mess with Texas.
And finally, after almost 10 endless minutes, police do show up.
From my understanding, the police were actually sent to a different gas station of the same name down the road. I guess that Otto sent them to the other one of the same name.
Police take the robber into custody and identify him as 19-year-old Dylan Bearden.
He was surprisingly a pretty respectful guy there towards the end. You know, he was saying yes sir, no sir to the police officers. To me, you know, had no intention of fighting back or running after the police got there.
Bearden is charged with aggravated robbery. And everyone is grateful Daniel was there.
They said, thank you, good job. Found out I was a Marine. Oh, okay, well, that makes sense. You Marines are crazy. You know, in a funny way, joking manner. And it figures it'd be a Marine that would jump on a guy with a knife.
After talking to police, Daniel heads straight to work, just as he'd been planning to do when he first walked into the store. And he modestly shrugs off what he did.
It ended as amazingly as it could. There's so many what ifs, what could have happened. What I do know is I thank God that I was there. I thank God that I was able to help that woman and help in that situation.
But everyone else knows he saved the day.
It's very possible that not only would these people have been robbed in this convenience store, but it's very possible that the workers could have been harmed or even killed.
And when police released the security footage to the media, he's hailed as a hero.
It only took a few seconds to decide he was going to stop the robber who just brushed past him with a knife in a Midlothian convenience store.
And a 19-year-old shoved past him and held on a hunting knife about 5 inches long to the cashier. Gasky then managed to hold the man down until police arrived.
It's going all over the news everywhere. People are seeing it and they're loving it. He's a Marine, he's a fireman, and he stops this horrible crime. And he pretty much saves this young clerk's life by his actions.
People were commenting on how he was a hero. People even offered to take him out to dinner.
But Daniel still downplays the whole ordeal.
I'm not anything special. I'm a guy who wrestled in high school and served my country, and now I serve my community. What I am is a guy who knows that I'm going to help someone in trouble. You know, that's the bottom line.
Daniel has to protect and serve. It is what he's done from the very beginning as a Marine. It's what he does every day as a firefighter. So this is ingrained in his character. It's hard to separate that, even if your life is on the line.
And now, Daniel's only hope is that his story can give a positive message to others.
Hopefully it inspired some people to pay more attention to help each other out. The tenacity of a good citizen and good Samaritan is undeniable.
It's a woman's worst nightmare.
He was grabbing something from his pocket, which looked like a switchblade.
She's being followed by a stranger.
My worst fear is sex trafficking or abduction.
This is terrifying.
But she fights back.
My intuition was right. This man, he's done it before.
And coming up later, a vicious attack on a child.
He just sucker punches this kid out of nowhere.
Why did I do it?
Who else is in danger?
Do they have guns? I have kids with me.
Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. Just after 5 p.m., Vancouver, Canada. 26-year-old Jamie Coots is heading home after a quick trip to the drugstore.
I'm walking directly downtown, probably the nicest part of Vancouver. About halfway home, I could feel somebody walking really close behind me. When I was looking at my phone, I can kind of feel that they're just stopped there.
Jamie feels uneasy, so she looks behind her to try and get a better look at the person.
He's maybe 155 pounds. He's a small guy. I would say 5'7", 5'8", a little bit darker skin, darker hair, dark eyes.
Besides his eyes, Jamie can't see the man's face. It's completely hidden by his sweatshirt hood and mask.
This is very typical of someone who has ill intent. They want to be incognito so that all of their really poignant features aren't highlighted, especially their face.
I put my phone away and looked up and said, "You're walking too close to me." And the man, he didn't say anything to me. So I was like, okay, that's weird.
The stranger is clearly following Jamie. But why?
It's possible that this stalker was trying to figure out where she lives, where she works, who she was meeting up with, trying to gain as much information about her as possible.
I think he was waiting for a reaction from me to try calling 911, to running, to screaming.
If Jamie calls 911, will the man hear and get angry? Instead, she decides to turn on her phone's camera.
My only thought was, you can't go home. And so that's why my body told me to record what's happening. I truly thought that that would kind of deter him a little bit. I could call the police, but that couple of seconds in between stopping the recording and trying to make the phone call, he could have approached me. And that would be the access point to come grab me.
When you're in a situation like this, you're thinking, I'm either going to survive or I'm not. And so she's thinking, what can I use? What are my weapons? For someone who's a civilian who doesn't carry around weapons, your phone can be quite powerful because of that camera. So this was really quick thinking on her part. So at least she has this guy on film. Something happens to her.
I took my phone and I held it like this, up as high as I could, so him and everybody else could see that I was recording. That way I could have a plain view of what's in front of me and how far he is behind me.
But whoever this man is, and whatever he wants, the camera doesn't stop him.
He did not care at all. He looked the camera straight. He was not scared of being filmed. He has no intention of giving up. He's walking at an extremely quick pace, and you can see him kind of double step. I walked through a red light at one point, just as the light's changing, and he keep up with me. I'm definitely scared. It's the first nice day, but I'm still in a big winter jacket and I'm walking on the verge of running. So I'm covered in sweat. My t-shirt was soaking wet. You can see him in multiple parts of the video wiping his face like this, trying to keep up with me. I continue to walk, and what should have been a 10-minute walk quickly turned into about 30 minutes. There's absolutely no other space to wonder what's going to happen next because I'm absolutely consumed with what my next move is going to be. I'm shaking. My adrenaline's definitely at its peak.
Jamie needs to outrun or outwit the man who is following her as fast as she can.
My worst fear is sex trafficking or abduction. In Vancouver, we do have a big sex trafficking issue. We are one of the main ports, and there's been a huge amount of women going missing in the area. All I wanted more than anything was to go home, but I didn't want him to know anywhere close to where I lived. I decide that it's in my best interest to, one, continue reporting, and two, get somewhere that's highly populated. That's when it popped into my head, you know what, I'm gonna go to the skate park. There's a lot of people there. And if this man decided to do anything, there would be so much eyes. I went right to the absolute center of the skate park, thinking that he wasn't gonna follow me in, and he continued to follow.
Nothing is stopping this man, and Jamie is panicked.
I'm just trying to look for the biggest group of people and hope to get help.
Hey, do you mind if I sit with you guys? This guy's literally been following me in circles for like 40 minutes, and I've been recording it.
Yeah,
and he's literally just standing behind me, and I don't know his issue.
Yeah, that's cool. Why don't you just pull up and sit?
But even when Jamie sits down, the stalker doesn't go away.
In the video, you can see he's either holding something or he's got fists in his jacket pockets because his hands are in there, and he's trying to pull his fists out, but having kind of a hard time.
Does this man have a weapon? What does he want?
He's probably sizing up the situation to see if he could ultimately take her or attack her. This is terrifying. Had she not gone to a group of people, maybe we would not have seen her again.
The man lingers for a few minutes, but as more and more skaters turn to watch him, he finally leaves.
You can see him start to walk away, and then one of the girls who was skateboarding there tried to approach him, but he continued to walk away.
Now, all Jamie wants to do is get home. But she's paralyzed with fear.
I saw the direction that he walked off in, and when I was ready, I made the mission home, but I had eyes all around me the entire time. I called the police and I let them know what happened. I give them a description of the man and screenshot a couple images from the video I had taken. Later that evening, I decided it's probably kind of important if I post this to social media. My initial thought was if I post this, maybe somebody would be like, oh, I've seen that guy.
To Jamie's shock, she isn't the only one who's had interactions with this stalker.
I had a huge amount of people come forward saying that they've had similar situations in the past. And then about 4 women say that they were stalked very recently by somebody who appeared to look like the same man.
This is very disturbing because when someone is a serial stalker, that means that they're thinking about what they're going to do to their victims. And that means that it doesn't stop at one person.
One of the women, Nani Gonzalez, is actually from within Jamie's own circle of friends.
10 seconds into the video, I was just like, oh my God, this was the same person that had recently followed me.
Fortunately, Gonzalez says she was able to avoid the man and lost him before she reached her home.
By the next morning, I had hundreds of messages asking me to go public.
Social media sleuths are eager to help Jamie figure out who the man is.
People wanted to figure out exactly who he was, messaging me all kinds of crazy things that I didn't even notice to look out for. Hey, did you notice there was a car with the back window unrolled?
They also point out something Jamie never saw. It looks like the stalker had something in his hand.
He was grabbing something from his pocket and putting it into his satchel, which looked like a switchblade or maybe a box cutter. And you see him at one point get caught off guard by another girl that he keeps kind of looking back at. And I was told by many people that she kind of had a similar look to me. And so I wonder if there's a specific type of woman that maybe he tries to go for. It wasn't until I had posted it to social media that I realized, okay, my intuition was right on knowing that this man, he's done it before, he's gonna do it again.
Just a few days after Jamie posts her video, the Vancouver police apprehend a suspect who they believe is connected to the disturbing stalking incidents. He is charged with criminal harassment for Jamie's incident.
We're very pleased that we were able to arrest the right person in this case.
Social media is amazing these days. You can put something on there and really reach a lot of people.
The ordeal has left Jamie shaken and constantly on alert.
I think about it all the time. You really don't expect what happened to happen in broad daylight. I think that your gut is the most important thing in the whole world. From my experience, I've learned that if something doesn't feel right, to trust it.
And she hopes talking about her experience
Also trying to process what had just happened.
will help honor those who weren't as fortunate as she was.
I was super lucky. There's a lot of women going missing. I don't want those people to be forgotten. And so I use this as an opportunity to speak out for them.
In Missouri, a brave young boy is also speaking out after a frightening attack. Friday, July 3rd, 2020. Downtown Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 11:40 p.m. A youth hip-hop group shows off their moves.
We were performing downtown, which is a few blocks over from our studio. It was a very usual thing for us to do on the weekends, just to bring in some extra money for the kiddos.
12-year-old Ethan Hagler, known in the group as E-Man, is one of the students participating in the street performance.
It's not abnormal for Ethan to be out with his friends on a non-school night past 10. It was 4th of July weekend. Ethan went off with his dance friends, just go hang out and dance and be in the downtown atmosphere.
There's a lot of people there. They would walk by and like see us dancing, but we would make sure they don't like stay too close to us.
We're DJing, we're having fun, we're talking to people, and with all the positive energy flowing, I decided to turn on my Facebook Live to show everyone. That's what we do.
We just let it record, and we just start dancing, we start DJing.
I'd seen several cars that were just circling around the block, which was normal.
But within 10 minutes, their night takes a sudden and terrifying turn.
This kid is dancing, and he's having a good time, and this car abruptly stops, and this man gets out of the car.
And he starts to dance along with us. He gets close, and I see him rear back, and
with no warning, the man attacks Ethan.
He just sucker punches this kid out of nowhere.
Ethan's attacker never says a word. He just punches the 12-year-old brutally in the face, then bolts.
I ran after the guy. I tried to catch him, and I saw two other people in the car.
This instructor is in a really precarious situation. He's there to protect these minors.
I'm thinking, do they have guns? I have kids with me. Should I pursue this guy?
Everyone is in shock and in terror.
I remember getting hit. I fell over, and then I blacked out. And then I woke up and I was crowded with people around me. I was very confused. I was very shocked. And I was like, what just happened? And I didn't know what to do. Blood was going all over the place. Michael immediately called my mom. She ran straight for me. She kept on saying that she was sorry, but she wasn't there.
The bouncers at the bar across the street, I kind of waved at them, come here, come here, come here, and they're right on it. They brought out ice, they brought out water to help wash off the blood and made sure that E-Man was okay. They also called 911 for us.
That's when Ethan sees the video of what just happened.
Michael, he gave me the phone and showed me what happened. When I saw me fall, I was like, dang. The cop asked me some questions, and then my mom took me straight to the closest hospital.
They immediately went and did an MRI.
The doctors told me that I had a seriously bad concussion.
In the ER, Ethan's mom sees the video for the first time.
I was instantly so angry that I felt hot. We watched it over and over and over. And he said, I just want to understand why this happened.
Why did I get hit?
By Sunday, 2 days after the attack, hundreds of Facebook users have shared Michael Curry's video. It's viewed more than 970,000 times.
The grown man is attacking a boy from behind. That's cause for outrage and anger. Is this a gang attack, an initiation of some sort? There's something that seems premeditated about this.
A family wants your help identifying this man in the photo behind me.
I did not expect this video to become viral like it did.
It spread like wildfire.
It was shared, it was commented on, and people contacted the police.
Within just 1 day, the viral video gives police a critical tip: the name of the suspect.
Breaking at 5, this 27-year-old Cape Girardeau man.
The video, it was on the news in Paducah, in Cape County, in St. Louis County, CNN, TMZ, the New York Times. It was everywhere. It was just comment, comment, comment. This is Cedric Moore. This is Cedric Moore. This is Cedric Moore.
The police definitely knew who he was because his other crimes that he's committed.
He was on probation currently for a domestic assault where he beat up his girlfriend.
So many tips come into the police, it makes it easy for them to find Cedric Moore Jr.
They contacted the police about his whereabouts and about his past. Eventually, he had nowhere left to hide. He turned himself in within a week.
No one else who was in the car is ever identified. But Moore's bond is set at $50,000, cash only.
I felt so relieved. I cried. I was so grateful.
I'm glad it was recorded and his face was seen.
Without the camera rolling that night, I don't think the suspect would have been caught.
10 months later, Ethan faces his attacker in court as he is charged with second-degree assault. Moore refuses to say Ethan's name out loud and offers no explanation for his actions.
I asked Ethan 3 or 4 times, I said, how are you handling this so well? He looked me in the eye and he said, he can't hurt me anymore. The deal that was offered was that we would drop the child endangerment in exchange for him pleading to the assault charge. So his probation has been revoked and he has to do the 4 years for that prior assault. And then he got 7 years for the assault on my son. When he is released,
I'm gonna be like around like 21 maybe.
there will be a restraining order that Mr. Moore can never ever come anywhere near Ethan ever again without immediately going right back to jail.
I just really hope the lesson that he learns is powerful enough to make him change paths to a more positive life.
Ethan still isn't fully recovered.
I still get multiple headaches and it's hard for me to sleep. School is hard for me as well.
He sees a therapist every week. He was diagnosed with PTSD. His vision has probably been permanently damaged.
But he is determined never to allow that night to crush his dreams. And now performs on a national level.
Ethan dances 5 nights a week, competes on the weekends, travels all over.
We focus on the arts, and with art comes confidence. When you can show a kid that they are bigger than they think they are, you're showing them a path to being a positive adult. He's a really big role model for a lot of kids around here.
If you want to follow your dreams, then keep on going. Don't stop and don't let anyone bring you down.
There are places in the world where beauty and violence have learned to exist side by side for so long that one almost seems to conceal the other. Sicily is one of those places. To millions of visitors, the island is remembered for its brilliant coastline, ancient stone villages, fertile hillsides, and generations of traditions that stretch back thousands of years. It is a place where church bells echo through narrow streets, where families gather around long dinner tables, and where history appears to linger in every weathered building. Yet beneath that familiar image existed another world, one that operated according to different rules, recognized different authorities, and enforced its own version of justice. For decades, that invisible world shaped everyday life not through written laws, but through fear. It was a system in which silence could determine whether someone survived another day, where loyalty was measured not by words, but by obedience, and where questioning the wrong people could become a death sentence. In that hidden landscape, the men who wore the uniforms of the Italian state often found themselves confronting an enemy they could rarely see, but whose presence could always be felt. This is not the story of a single murder. It is not even the story of one investigation. Instead, it is the story of a campaign, a prolonged conflict between a criminal network determined to preserve its power and the investigators. Police officers, prosecutors, and judges who refuse to surrender to intimidation. In some English-language articles and documentaries, this long sequence of violence has occasionally been summarized under a dramatic expression: Carabinieri Killer, Luciano Liggio Network. The phrase immediately captures attention, suggesting a notorious criminal case centered on one spectacular crime. But history tells a more complicated story. There was never an official criminal case bearing that title. No single investigation, court file, or judicial proceeding carried that name. Rather, the expression serves as a convenient label for a series of attacks carried out, or believed to have been directed, by the criminal organization built around Luciano Liggio during the decades when the Sicilian Mafia was reshaping itself into an even more ruthless force. Understanding that distinction matters because it changes the way this story must be told. Instead of following one victim, we encounter many. Instead of tracing one investigation, we witness repeated attempts by law enforcement to expose an organization that adapted faster than the institutions pursuing it. Instead of one courtroom verdict providing a neat conclusion, we find years of partial victories. Unanswered questions, legal obstacles, and lives permanently altered by violence. This is not a mystery solved in a single dramatic revelation. It is the gradual unfolding of a conflict in which every investigation became connected to those that came before it. Every murder carried echoes of an earlier one, and every attempt to bring the perpetrators to justice revealed how difficult it was to dismantle a criminal structure built upon secrecy and fear. At the center of that structure stood Luciano Liggio. Born in 1925, Liggio would become one of the most influential figures within the Corleonesi, the mafia faction based in the Sicilian town of Corleone. His rise to power was marked by violence. After the killing of mafia boss Michele Navarra in 1958, Liggio emerged as the dominant leader of the Corleonesi. But his greatest legacy was not merely taking control of one criminal faction. It was creating a network capable of surviving arrests, investigations, and even the imprisonment of its own leader. Around him gathered younger associates who would later become infamous in their own right, including Salvatore Riina and Bernardo Provenzano. Together, the organization they helped build would eventually become responsible for hundreds of killings during the mafia wars that devastated Sicily in the decades that followed. Yet this episode is not intended to glorify the men who commanded that violence. History has often remembered organized crime through the names of its bosses, portraying them as larger-than-life figures whose reputations grew alongside the myths surrounding them. But every celebrated mafia leader leaves behind a different legacy, one written in the lives interrupted by fear, in families forced to grieve, and in public servants who accepted extraordinary risks simply by doing their jobs. Behind every headline about a mafia boss stood investigators studying evidence late into the night, police officers driving roads where ambushes were always possible, prosecutors assembling cases despite knowing that success could place them in greater danger, and judges who understood that issuing certain legal decisions might one day cost them their lives. Their names are often remembered less frequently than those of the criminals they pursued. Yet without them, the history of Italy's struggle against organized crime would be impossible to understand. The term Carabinieri killer emerged because the Carabinieri, Italy's national military police force, became one of the principal obstacles facing Liggio's organization. Throughout the period covered in this story, investigators linked to the Corleonesi repeatedly found themselves confronting a pattern of violence directed against those attempting to expose the organization. Carabinieri officers investigating mafia activity became targets. Investigators pursuing critical evidence became targets. Witnesses willing to cooperate with authorities became targets. Prosecutors preparing legal cases became targets. Judges who sought to transform suspicions into convictions also became targets. Not every killing could be legally traced directly back to Liggio himself. In several important cases, courts ultimately concluded that direct evidence was insufficient to establish his personal responsibility beyond reasonable doubt. Nevertheless, investigators and prosecutors repeatedly viewed his organization as the driving force behind a sustained campaign intended to eliminate anyone threatening its survival. That distinction between investigative belief and judicial proof will remain one of the defining themes throughout this narrative. The rule of law requires more than suspicion. It demands evidence capable of surviving the scrutiny of a courtroom. Again and again, authorities believed they understood who benefited from these murders. Again and again, proving those conclusions according to legal standards proved extraordinarily difficult. Fear played a decisive role. Witnesses hesitated to testify. Others remained silent altogether. Every missing testimony weakened prosecutions. Every unanswered question allowed uncertainty to to persist. The result was a recurring pattern in which investigators could reconstruct pieces of the truth, while still struggling to satisfy the demanding burden required for criminal conviction. That gap between knowing and proving became one of the greatest advantages enjoyed by the criminal organization. As this story unfolds, listeners will encounter individuals whose lives intersected with this conflict at different moments. A labor leader fighting for land reform whose disappearance triggered one of the earliest confrontations between the mafia and determined investigators. A young Carabinieri officer who refused to abandon an investigation despite enormous obstacles. A senior officer who continued examining the activities of the Corleonesi years later and was ultimately murdered. A judge who devoted years to constructing legal cases against organized crime before becoming a victim himself. Their stories did not occur simultaneously, nor were they isolated tragedies. Together, they formed chapters within the same larger struggle, a struggle between institutions, attempting to enforce the law and an organization determined to convince everyone that resistance was futile. By the time this episode reaches its conclusion, one truth will become unmistakably clear. The greatest strength of Luciano Liggio's network did not lie solely in its ability to commit acts of violence. Its true strength was its capacity to transform fear into a system of control, allowing the organization to continue functioning even after its leader had been arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment. A criminal empire capable of surviving without its founder presented investigators with a challenge. Unlike any ordinary murder investigation, removing one individual did not dismantle the structure he had created. Instead, the network endured, its influence eventually passing to a new generation of leaders who would intensify the conflict with the Italian state. Before that future unfolded, however, there were the first investigations, the first disappearances, the first murders, and the first officials who chose to confront a force many believed could never truly be defeated. Their decisions and the consequences that followed form the beginning of our story. To understand why so many investigators, police officers, prosecutors, and judges eventually found themselves confronting the same criminal organization, it is necessary to begin not with a murder, but with the environment that allowed such violence to flourish. The events described throughout this story unfolded in Sicily, where organized crime had established itself not simply as a collection of criminal groups, but as a deeply rooted system of influence. The organization known as Cosa and Nostra exercised power through intimidation, loyalty, secrecy, and violence. Its authority extended far beyond a legal business. It shaped relationships, discouraged cooperation with law enforcement, and cultivated an atmosphere in which fear became an everyday reality. Within that broader structure existed numerous mafia families, each operating in different territories while maintaining connections to one another. Among them, one faction would eventually gain a reputation for extraordinary brutality. The Corleonesi. Named after the town of Corleone, this faction did not initially dominate the Sicilian mafia. Over time, however, it transformed into one of the most feared organizations within Cosa Nostra. The rise of the Corleonesi did not happen overnight. It emerged through calculated violence, internal struggles for power, and the determination of individuals willing to eliminate rivals as a means of securing control. At the center of that transformation stood Luciano Liggio. Born in 1925, Liggio gradually rose within the ranks of the Corleonesi before becoming its dominant figure. His ascent reached a decisive turning point in 1958 with the killing of Michele Navarra, the mafia boss who had previously led the organization. Following Navarra's death, Liggio assumed control of the Corleonesi, fundamentally reshaping its structure and future direction. His leadership marked the beginning of a new phase in the organization's history. Rather than relying solely on older traditions of mafia hierarchy, Legio built a network around younger associates who would later become some of the most notorious figures in the history of organized crime. Among these emerging members were Salvatore Riina and Bernardo Provenzano. At the time, they entered Legio's circle. They were younger men whose importance had not yet fully emerged. Under Legio's leadership, however, they became integral components of an organization that would eventually be associated with hundreds of killings during the violent mafia conflicts that scarred Sicily in later decades. Their future prominence illustrates one of Legio's most significant legacies. His influence was not limited to the crimes committed while he remained at liberty. He created an organizational structure capable of surviving changes in leadership, allowing violence to continue even when he himself could no longer direct events in person. This capacity for institutional continuity would later become one of the greatest challenges facing Italian authorities. Understanding Legio's organization also requires recognizing that its strength did not depend solely upon armed men or legal profits. It depended upon organization. According to investigators, the Corleonesi operated through relatively independent groups capable of carrying out assignments without exposing the full structure of network. Younger assassins could perform violent acts while remaining personally unfamiliar with many of the individuals occupying higher positions within the organization. Communication frequently occurred indirectly, making it difficult for investigators to establish clear chains of command. Such methods complicated criminal investigations because proving responsibility required demonstrating more than the occurrence of violence itself. Courts demanded evidence connecting particular individuals to specific criminal acts. When orders passed through multiple intermediaries, establishing that connection became substantially more difficult. The organization also understood the strategic value of eliminating witnesses. Anyone considering cooperation with law enforcement faced enormous risks. Even the possibility that an individual might provide information could place that person in danger. As witnesses disappeared or refused to testify, investigations became increasingly fragile. Evidence that appeared convincing during preliminary inquiries often weakened once courtroom proceedings required direct testimony. This atmosphere of fear became one of the defining characteristics of the conflict between the Italian state and the Corleonesi. Every investigation unfolded against the backdrop of uncertainty over whether witnesses would remain willing or even able to speak. For members of the Carabinieri, the consequences extended beyond professional frustration. They understood that investigating the organization could transform them into targets themselves. The Carabinieri occupied a central position in Italy's efforts to combat organized crime. As one of the country's principal law enforcement institutions, they conducted investigations, gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and pursued individuals suspected of mafia activity. Their work inevitably brought them into direct confrontation with organizations determined to preserve secrecy and power. According to the information available, Legio's network repeatedly directed violence toward those who threatened its survival. Carabinieri officers became victims. Investigators became victims. Witnesses became victims. Prosecutors became victims. Judges became victims. The phrase Carabinieri killer, though not an official legal designation, reflects this recurring pattern of attacks against representatives of the justice system. Rather than identifying one isolated crime, it captures an extended campaign in which the institutions responsible for enforcing the law found themselves repeatedly under assault. Among the earliest individuals whose fate would become intertwined with this conflict was Placido Rizzato. Unlike many of the officials discussed later in this episode, Rizzato was not a police officer or judge. He was a labor leader dedicated to the cause of land reform. His efforts placed him at the center of social tensions that extended beyond ordinary political disagreement. During a period when questions of land ownership and rural authority carried profound significance throughout Sicily, his activism challenged established interests. According to subsequent investigations, Rosado was abducted and murdered. His disappearance immediately attracted attention because it represented more than the loss of one individual. It became one of the earliest incidents drawing determined scrutiny from the Carabinieri toward the activities of the Corleonesi. Investigators ultimately identified Luciano Liggio and members of his organization as primary suspects. Yet suspicion alone could not resolve the case. Witnesses feared retaliation. Cooperation proved limited. Despite arrests involving some members of the group, the legal process encountered obstacles that prevented investigators from securing the kind of definitive judicial outcome they sought. The Rosado case therefore became significant not only because of the crime itself, but because it demonstrated the immense difficulties awaiting anyone attempting to confront organized crime through conventional legal procedures. Assigned to investigate Rosado's disappearance was a young Carabinieri captain named Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa. At this stage of his career, Dalla Chiesa had not yet become the nationally recognized symbol of resistance to organized crime that history would later remember. He was an investigator attempting to reconstruct the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of a labor leader while confronting a climate dominated by intimidation. His investigation pointed toward Liggio and his associates. Evidence collected during the inquiry led to arrests involving members of the organization. Yet once again, the effectiveness of the investigation encountered the same barrier that would repeatedly appear throughout later anti-mafia efforts. Witnesses were reluctant to cooperate. Fear undermined testimony. Legal proceedings struggled to convert investigative conclusions into lasting convictions. For Dalla Chiesa, this experience illustrated a reality that countless investigators would later encounter. Identifying suspects represented only the beginning of the struggle. Demonstrating guilt according to the demanding standards required in court proved considerably more difficult. Nevertheless, his determination established him as one of the earliest law enforcement officers willing to challenge the Corleonesi directly. Years later, after building a distinguished career in the fight against organized crime, Dalla Chiesa himself would become a victim of Cosa Nostra. By the time of his assassination in 1982, Liggio was already imprisoned, while effective control of the Corleonesi had shifted towards Salvatore Riina. Even so, Dalla Chiesa's death reflected the continuation of the same conflict that had begun decades earlier with the investigation into Placido Rosado's disappearance. His career effectively linked the earliest confrontations with Liggio's organization to the broader struggle that later engulfed Italy. Another figure whose life intersected with this long campaign was Giuseppe Russo, a lieutenant colonel in the Carabinieri. Like Dalla Chiesa, Russo devoted his efforts to investigating the Corleonesi. His work placed him directly against an organization that had already demonstrated its willingness to eliminate perceived threats. On August 20th, 1977, Russo was shot and killed near Corleone. Although Liggio was serving a life sentence at the time, investigators and prosecutors believed that his influence within the organization remained substantial. According to those involved in the investigation, the order for Russo's killing was believed to have originated within Liggio's network, illustrating how the organization's operational capacity continued despite its leader's imprisonment. Whether or not every element of that belief could be legally established in court, Russo's death reinforced the perception that removing one leader had not dismantled the criminal structure itself. The network continued functioning, adapting to changing circumstances while preserving its ability to intimidate opponents. Equally significant was the story of Judge Cesare Terranova. Unlike police investigators gathering evidence in the field, Terranova confronted organized crime through the judicial process. He became one of the earliest judges to assemble legal cases directed against Liggio. His work represented the transition from criminal investigation to prosecution, attempting to transform suspicion into legally sustainable accusations. That effort made him a symbol of institutional resistance against organized crime. In 1979, Terranova and his bodyguard were assassinated. Cooperating witnesses later described the murder as an act of revenge carried out by the Corleonesi against a judge who had persistently pursued Liggio through legal channels. Yet even in relation to such a devastating crime, the distinction between investigative belief and judicial proof remained critically important. Liggio was ultimately acquitted because direct evidence establishing his responsibility proved insufficient under the standards required by law. The outcome underscored one of the central dilemmas explored throughout this story. Investigators, prosecutors, and cooperating witnesses might sincerely believe they understood who stood behind a crime, but criminal convictions demanded proof capable of surviving rigorous judicial examination. The legal system's obligation to require evidence beyond reasonable doubt sometimes produced verdicts that differed from the conclusions investigators had reached. This distinction does not diminish the importance of the investigations themselves. Rather, it demonstrates the extraordinary difficulty of prosecuting organized crime when violence, secrecy, indirect communication, and witness intimidation continually obstructed the search for definitive proof. Viewed together, the lives of Placido Rosado, Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, Giuseppe Russo, and Cesare Terranova reveal that this was never a sequence of unrelated tragedies. Each individual occupied a different role within Italian society. One sought social reform. One investigated disappearances. One pursued organized crime through police work. One attempted to hold criminal leaders accountable through the courts. Yet each ultimately became connected by the same criminal network and the same enduring struggle between fear and justice. Their stories spanned different years, different professional responsibilities, and different forms of public service. But together, they illustrate how Liggio's organization confronted every institution capable of threatening its survival. Before examining the crimes themselves, it is important to recognize that these individuals were more than names appearing in investigative files or judicial records. They represented the human cost of challenging an organization that sought not merely to eliminate particular opponents, but to discourage resistance altogether. Every attack carried a broader message intended for those who might continue the work left unfinished by the victims. Every investigation, therefore, became about more than solving an individual crime. It became part of a larger contest over whether the authority of the Italian state or the authority of organized crime would ultimately prevail. That contest would unfold over many years, and the events that followed would reveal both the remarkable persistence of those pursuing justice and the extraordinary resilience of the criminal network they sought to dismantle. The conflict between Luciano Liggio's network and the institutions of the Italian state cannot be understood through a single crime scene. There was no one investigation that exposed the entire organization. No solitary act of violence that revealed its full reach. Instead, the pattern emerged gradually, each incident adding another layer to an increasingly disturbing picture. A labor leader disappeared. An investigator found himself confronting a wall of silence. Years later, another officer investigating the same criminal organization was murdered. Then a judge who had spent years trying to build legal cases against mafia figures was assassinated. alongside his bodyguard. Individually, each event represented a separate criminal investigation. Together, they revealed a consistent strategy: remove those who threaten the survival of the organization, weaken public confidence in the justice system, and ensure that fear remained more powerful than the law. The incidents described in this chapter unfolded over decades, yet they shared common characteristics that investigators would gradually come to recognize. The targets differed, but the underlying objective remained remarkably consistent. The organization did not simply respond to immediate danger. It sought to discourage future resistance by demonstrating the consequences of challenging its authority. The first major episode illustrating this strategy centered on the disappearance of Placido Rosado. Rosado was known as a labor leader committed to advocating for land reform. His work placed him in the middle of social tensions that extended well beyond ordinary political disagreement. Questions surrounding land ownership and rural influence carried profound importance in post-war Sicily, where economic interests and traditional power structures often intersected with organized crime. According to the information available, Rosado was abducted and murdered. His disappearance immediately generated concern because it involved a prominent public figure whose absence could not easily be dismissed. Unlike crimes committed in secrecy against unknown victims, the disappearance attracted official attention and required an organized investigative response. For the Carabinieri, this became more than an inquiry into one missing individual. It represented an opportunity to examine the influence of the Corleonesi and the emerging leadership of Luciano Liggio. Investigators gradually directed their attention toward Liggio and members of his organization. Their suspicions did not arise randomly, but developed through the collection of evidence and investigative work conducted in the aftermath of Rosado's disappearance. As the inquiry progressed, authorities identified individuals connected to Liggio's network as principal suspects. Several members of the group were arrested. At first glance, these developments appeared promising. Arrests suggested that investigators were making progress, that the legal process might finally expose those responsible and establish accountability. Yet the optimism surrounding those early investigative successes soon encountered a reality that would repeatedly frustrate anti-mafia efforts for decades. Witnesses became reluctant to cooperate. Fear spread through the community. Individuals who might have possessed critical information hesitated to speak openly with investigators or testify before the courts. Whether motivated by concern for their own safety, the safety of their families, or the belief that cooperation would ultimately prove futile, many potential witnesses remained silent. Without reliable testimony, prosecutors faced extraordinary difficulty transforming investigative suspicions into convictions capable of surviving judicial scrutiny. The disappearance of Placido Rosado, therefore, became significant not only because of the crime itself, but because it exposed the structural obstacles confronting law enforcement whenever organized crime relied upon intimidation as one of its principal defenses. The investigation into Rosado's disappearance introduced another individual whose career would become inseparable from Italy's struggle against the mafia: Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa. At the time, Dalla Chiesa served as a young captain in the Carabinieri. His assignment required him to investigate the disappearance thoroughly, examine available evidence, interview witnesses, and identify those responsible. Unlike later periods in his life, when he became nationally recognized for his commitment to combating organized crime, Dalla Chiesa entered this investigation as an officer performing his professional duties under exceptionally difficult circumstances. The inquiry eventually pointed toward Luciano Liggio and his associates. Investigators gathered evidence they believed connected the organization to the disappearance and presumed murder of Rosado. Their efforts resulted in arrests involving members of Legio's network, demonstrating that law enforcement had succeeded in penetrating at least part of the organization's protective secrecy. Yet each advance produced another obstacle. Every piece of evidence required corroboration. Every accusation demanded testimony capable of withstanding cross-examination. Every investigative conclusion faced the rigorous standards imposed by criminal courts. Here, fear again became the organization's greatest ally. Witnesses refused to cooperate or proved unwilling to testify openly. The resulting absence of direct evidence weakened prosecutions and contributed to repeated failures to secure lasting convictions against Legio. For Dalla Chiesa, the investigation became an early lesson in the enormous complexity of combating organized crime through legal institutions alone. Solving crimes required more than identifying suspects. It required building cases strong enough to survive a judicial process designed to protect both public safety and the rights of the accused. The distinction between investigative certainty and legal proof would become a recurring theme. Throughout his career, although the Rosado investigation failed to achieve the decisive legal outcome authorities had hoped for, it permanently altered the relationship between the Carabinieri and the Corleonesi. From that point forward, the organization increasingly viewed determined investigators as dangerous adversaries rather than ordinary police officers. The conflict had entered a new stage. The years that followed demonstrated that this confrontation would not disappear. Instead, it evolved alongside the criminal organization itself. Luciano Legio consolidated his position within the Corleonesi after assuming leadership in 1958. Around him gathered younger associates, including Salvatore Rina and Bernardo Provenzano, who would later become central figures within the organization. The network expanded its influence while refining methods that complicated law enforcement efforts. According to the available information, the organization relied upon relatively independent groups capable of carrying out violent acts without exposing the entire command structure. Indirect communication insulated senior figures from direct association with specific crimes. Young assassins attracted less suspicion while ensuring operational flexibility. Witnesses who considered cooperating with authorities faced grave risks. These characteristics transformed individual investigations into prolonged struggles against an adaptable and disciplined criminal network. Even when authorities succeeded in identifying participants in specific crimes, demonstrating responsibility at the highest organizational levels remained extraordinarily difficult. By the mid-1970s, the confrontation between investigators and the Corleonesi had entered another tragic chapter. Giuseppe Russo, a lieutenant colonel in the Carabinieri, devoted his work to investigating the activities of the Corleonesi. Like Dalla Chiesa before him, Russo represented the determination of law enforcement to continue examining the organization's operations despite earlier frustrations. His investigation placed him in direct conflict with individuals whose survival depended upon secrecy. On August 20th, 1977, Russo was murdered near Corleone. The assassination carried profound symbolic significance. It demonstrated that the passage of time had not reduced the danger confronting investigators. Instead, officers pursuing the organization continued to face lethal consequences. Russo's death also presented authorities with a troubling reality concerning Luciano Legio himself. By 1977, Legio was serving a life sentence following his arrest in Milan on May 16, 1974. Conventional assumptions might suggest that imprisoning the leader of a criminal organization would substantially weaken its ability to coordinate violence. Yet investigators and prosecutors believed that Legio retained considerable influence within the Corleonesi even while incarcerated. According to their assessment, The order leading to Russo's murder originated within the organization that Legio had built and continued to influence despite his imprisonment. Whether every element of that conclusion could be established to the satisfaction of a criminal court remained a separate legal question. Nevertheless, the investigation reinforced growing concerns that removing one individual from society had not dismantled the broader structure responsible for repeated acts of violence. The network possessed organizational resilience. Leadership could evolve without interrupting operations. Violence continued despite the imprisonment of its founder. This realization profoundly affected law enforcement strategy because it suggested that success required more than arresting prominent individuals. Investigators confronted an entire system capable of reproducing itself. Only 2 years after Russo's assassination, another devastating attack struck the Italian justice system. Judge Cesare Terranova had earned recognition as one of the earliest judicial figures committed to constructing legal cases against Luciano Legio. Unlike investigators working in the field, Terranova confronted organized crime through careful legal analysis, transforming investigative findings into formal prosecutions whenever sufficient evidence permitted. His efforts represented the judicial counterpart to police investigations. If officers collected evidence, judges ensured that evidence entered the legal process according to established principles of justice. Terranova's work, therefore, threatened the organization in a fundamentally different manner. Successful prosecutions possessed the potential not merely to expose criminal activity, but to impose lasting legal consequences upon those responsible. In 1979, Terranova and his bodyguard were assassinated. The murder shocked observers because it targeted not simply an individual, but the judicial institution itself. According to cooperating witnesses who later provided information to investigators, the assassination constituted retaliation by the Corleonesi against a judge who had spent years pursuing legal action against Legio. Such testimony appeared to support the broader investigative conclusion that the organization systematically removed officials perceived as threats. Yet once again, the legal process confronted the distinction between allegation and proof. Despite testimony suggesting a retaliatory motive connected to Legio's earlier prosecutions, courts ultimately concluded that direct evidence establishing Legio's personal responsibility remained insufficient. He was acquitted in relation to the murder because the available evidence failed to satisfy the legal standard required for conviction. This outcome illustrates one of the most important themes running throughout every incident described in this episode. Criminal investigations seek the truth through evidence, witness interviews, forensic analysis, and careful reconstruction of events. Courts, however, must evaluate whether that evidence proves guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Those two objectives often overlap, but they are not identical. Investigators may become convinced that a suspect bears responsibility based upon the totality of available information. Judges and juries must determine whether the evidence presented satisfies strict legal requirements. In cases involving organized crime, indirect communication, witness intimidation, and carefully concealed chains of command repeatedly complicated that determination. As a result, several investigations associated with Legio's organization produced enduring suspicion without corresponding convictions against him personally. This distinction should not be interpreted as evidence that investigators acted improperly or that courts failed in their responsibilities. Rather, it demonstrates the extraordinary complexity of prosecuting criminal organizations deliberately structured to obscure responsibility. The incidents involving Placido Rosado, Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, Giuseppe Russo, and Cesare Terranova reveal a recurring pattern extending across decades. Individuals occupying different professional roles encountered the same criminal network from different directions. Rosado challenged existing power structures through social activism. Dalla Chiesa pursued evidence as a Carabinieri investigator. Russo continued investigations into the Corleonesi years later. Terranova attempted to translate investigative findings into legal accountability. Although their individual stories differed, each encountered the same barriers: fear, silence, organizational secrecy, and the persistent difficulty of converting suspicion into legally sustainable proof. By examining these incidents together rather than separately, a broader picture begins to emerge. The organization did not merely react to isolated investigations. It consistently sought to protect itself by discouraging anyone capable of threatening its operations. Every successful investigation risked exposing additional members. Every cooperating witness threatened to reveal new information. Every prosecutor and judge possessed the potential to transform evidence into convictions. Consequently, attacks upon investigators and judicial officials served purposes extending beyond immediate retaliation. They reinforced an atmosphere in which future witnesses might remain silent. Future investigators might proceed more cautiously, and public confidence in the ability of the state to enforce its laws might gradually erode. These incidents therefore represent far more than individual criminal acts. They illustrate the evolution of a sustained confrontation between organized crime and democratic institutions, a confrontation in which violence became a calculated instrument for preserving secrecy, intimidating opponents, and ensuring the continued survival of the network Luciano Liggio had helped create. The next chapter will examine how investigators attempted to confront this invisible structure, why dismantling it proved so extraordinarily difficult, and how the organization continued operating even after its founder had been sentenced to spend the remainder of his life in prison. By the time investigators began to recognize the broader pattern connecting the murders, disappearances, and attacks associated with Luciano Liggio's organization, one uncomfortable reality had already become impossible to ignore. They were no longer pursuing isolated offenders who acted independently. Instead, they faced an organization deliberately constructed to survive pressure from law enforcement. Every investigation that appeared to move closer to the truth encountered the same invisible barriers. Witnesses disappeared or refused to speak. Direct links between senior leaders and violent crimes remained elusive. Arrests produced only partial victories, even when authorities succeeded in imprisoning individual members. The organization itself continued functioning with remarkable resilience. What initially appeared to be a series of unrelated investigative frustrations gradually revealed itself as evidence of an organizational design intended to withstand exactly this kind of pressure. For the Carabinieri, prosecutors, and judges engaged in the struggle against the Corleonesi, the challenge became more than identifying those responsible for individual crimes. It became an effort to understand how the criminal network itself operated. Only by understanding that structure could investigators hope to explain why the same obstacles appeared repeatedly across different cases involving different victims over several decades. According to the available information, one of the defining characteristics of Liggio's organization was its reliance upon relatively independent operational groups. Unlike a rigid hierarchy in which every participant communicated directly with senior leadership, the network functioned through smaller units capable of carrying out specific assignments while possessing limited knowledge of the broader organization. Such compartmentalization offered important advantages. If one participant were arrested, that individual could reveal only a limited amount of information about the network as a whole. Investigators might successfully identify the immediate perpetrators of a crime without gaining meaningful insight into those who had authorized or coordinated it. Every missing connection weakened the prosecution's ability to establish responsibility at higher organizational levels. This organizational structure also complicated traditional investigative methods. Law enforcement agencies often rely upon reconstructing communication between suspects to establish conspiracy or command responsibility. Yet, according to investigators examining the Corleonesi, Liggio's network frequently depended upon indirect communication rather than explicit orders transmitted openly from leader to subordinate. Instructions passed through intermediaries, reducing the likelihood that investigators could identify clear chains of command. Even when violent acts appeared to benefit the organization, proving precisely who had ordered them remained extraordinarily difficult. Courts required evidence demonstrating individual responsibility rather than assumptions based solely upon organizational benefit. Consequently, investigators repeatedly confronted situations in which they believed they understood the broader context surrounding a crime while lacking the direct evidence necessary to satisfy judicial standards. Another defining feature of the organization involved its use of younger assassins. The available information indicates that Liggio built his network around younger associates, including Salvatore Riina and Bernardo Provenzano, who would later become major mafia leaders themselves. The reliance upon younger participants served multiple purposes. Operationally, it allowed the organization to develop future leadership while expanding its capacity to carry out violent acts. Investigatively, it further complicated efforts to connect senior figures directly to specific crimes. Individuals committing murders might possess little direct contact with organizational leaders, thereby reducing the evidentiary trail available to law enforcement. This separation between decision-makers and perpetrators became one of the greatest obstacles. Confronting prosecutors. Criminal responsibility within organized crime often extends beyond the person who physically commits an offense. Yet demonstrating that broader responsibility requires evidence establishing the existence of orders, planning, or coordination. The organizational methods employed by the Corleonesi consistently frustrated those efforts. Perhaps no element proved more damaging to criminal investigations than the systematic intimidation and elimination of witnesses. Throughout the cases associated with Liggio's organization, investigators repeatedly encountered reluctance among potential witnesses to provide testimony. The reasons were understandable. Anyone believed to be cooperating with authorities faced potentially grave consequences. According to the information available, the organization sought to eliminate witnesses whenever signs emerged that they might assist investigators. Such a strategy produced effects extending far beyond individual cases. Each act of intimidation served as a warning to countless others who might one day possess relevant information. Fear became cumulative. Every unsolved murder, every failed prosecution, and every report of retaliation reinforced public hesitation to cooperate with law enforcement. The resulting silence fundamentally altered the investigative process. Police officers might identify suspects through careful inquiry. They might gather circumstantial evidence suggesting responsibility. Yet without witnesses willing to confirm critical facts before a court, prosecutors often found themselves unable to bridge the final gap between suspicion and legally sufficient proof. The consequences appeared repeatedly throughout the incidents examined earlier. During the investigation into Placido Rosado's disappearance, arrests were made. But witness intimidation undermined efforts to secure definitive convictions against Liggio. Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa encountered firsthand the difficulties created by community fear. Years later, Similar problems continued affecting investigations into the murders of Giuseppe Russo and Judge Cesare Terranova. Different victims, different years, the same recurring obstacle. The organization had effectively transformed fear into one of its most valuable defensive tools. Investigators gradually came to understand that defeating such an organization required more than solving individual crimes. They faced a criminal culture in which silence itself had become an instrument of protection. The Corleonesi also benefited from another strategic advantage described in the available information: infiltration. According to investigators, the network placed individuals within businesses and local governmental structures. While the specific extent of that influence varied according to circumstance, the broader implication remained deeply troubling. Organized crime did not exist entirely outside legitimate society. Instead, it sought opportunities to establish connections capable of providing information, influence, or protection. Such infiltration complicated investigations because criminal organizations could potentially become aware of official activities before law enforcement completed them. Although the available information does not identify particular instances of compromised investigations, the existence of such a strategy illustrates why authorities viewed the organization as more than an ordinary criminal enterprise. It possessed the capacity to interact with legitimate institutions while simultaneously undermining them. Together, these characteristics created an exceptionally resilient criminal structure. Independent operational groups reduced organizational vulnerability. Indirect communication obscured responsibility. Younger assassins expanded operational capacity while insulating senior leadership. Witness intimidation suppressed evidence. Infiltration strengthened the organization's ability to anticipate or resist official scrutiny. None of these methods alone guaranteed immunity from prosecution. Combined, however, they created an environment in which even determined investigators struggled to establish the level of proof required by law. This distinction between investigative understanding and judicial proof became one of the defining themes throughout the anti-mafia struggle. Investigators frequently believed they understood how the organization functioned. They identified patterns. They recognized recurring beneficiaries of violence. They assembled evidence pointing toward broader criminal coordination. Yet criminal courts demanded more than investigative confidence. Every allegation required proof. Every accusation required evidence admissible under legal standards. Every conviction required demonstrating guilt beyond reasonable doubt. In ordinary criminal cases involving individual offenders, such requirements often prove challenging but achievable. Within highly organized criminal networks intentionally structured to conceal leadership involvement, the burden became considerably heavier. The experiences of Judge Cesare Terranova illustrate this dilemma particularly clearly. Terranova devoted substantial effort to building legal cases against Legio. His work reflected years of investigative cooperation, legal analysis, and prosecutorial preparation. Nevertheless, following his assassination in 1979, even testimony from cooperating witnesses describing the killing as retaliation ultimately failed to establish Legio's personal criminal responsibility according to judicial standards. He was acquitted because direct evidence remained insufficient. That verdict demonstrates an essential principle underlying democratic legal systems. Courts do not convict individuals solely because investigators strongly suspect their involvement or because criminal responsibility appears plausible. Convictions require evidence meeting rigorous legal thresholds. The inability to satisfy those standards in particular cases does not necessarily invalidate investigative conclusions. Instead, it reflects the legal system's commitment to distinguishing suspicion from proof. even when confronting exceptionally dangerous organizations. This distinction occasionally produced frustration among investigators who believed they had identified those responsible, yet remained unable to secure convictions. At the same time, it preserved the integrity of judicial proceedings by ensuring that criminal liability rested upon evidence rather than assumption. Perhaps the greatest turning point in the broader investigation of Liggio's organization occurred with his own arrests. After years spent avoiding permanent legal consequences, Liggio was arrested for the first time in 1964. For authorities, the arrest represented a significant achievement. Capturing the leader of the Corleonesi appeared to offer an opportunity to weaken the organization fundamentally. Yet events soon demonstrated how difficult that objective would become. Following the 1964 arrest, Liggio was released because of legal issues. The release underscored the reality that arrest alone does not determine criminal responsibility. Investigations must survive judicial review, procedural requirements, and evidentiary scrutiny. Law enforcement officers may successfully locate and detain suspects, but long-term imprisonment depends upon a successful completion of the legal process. For investigators who had devoted years to pursuing Liggio, his release represented a major setback. It reinforced the perception that dismantling the organization would require persistence extending far beyond a single arrest operation. A more decisive development occurred on May 16, 1974, when Liggio was arrested again in Milan. This time, legal proceedings ultimately resulted in a sentence of life imprisonment. On the surface, the outcome appeared to represent the culmination of years of investigative effort. The principal leader of the Corleonesi had been removed from society through the criminal justice system. Conventional expectations might suggest that the organization would now weaken substantially or collapse altogether. Yet subsequent events challenged that assumption. According to investigators, Liggio continued exercising considerable influence within the organization for a period even after receiving his life sentence. The murder of Giuseppe Russo in 1977 occurred while Liggio remained imprisoned. Yet investigators believed his organizational influence persisted. This belief reflected a broader recognition that the Corleonesi had evolved beyond dependence upon one individual. Liggio's greatest organizational achievement may have been constructing a network capable of functioning despite his physical absence. Leadership responsibilities increasingly shifted toward younger figures, particularly Salvatore Riina, who would later assume control of the organization. Rather than ending the conflict between the mafia and the Italian state, Liggio's imprisonment marked the transition to a new phase. The network survived. Its methods remained effective. Violence continued. Investigators, therefore, faced a sobering conclusion. Removing prominent leaders represented only one component of a much larger struggle. Criminal organizations built upon resilient structures, disciplined operational methods, and deeply ingrained cultures of secrecy could regenerate leadership without abandoning their fundamental objectives. The investigation had reached an important turning point. Authorities now understood that success required confronting not merely individual offenders, but the organizational system itself. Every future investigation would build upon that lesson. Every prosecutor, police officer, and judge entering the struggle inherited both the achievements and the frustrations of those who came before. The arrests of Luciano Liggio demonstrated that determined law enforcement could eventually reach even the most influential mafia leaders. At the same time, the continued operation of the Corleonesi after his imprisonment revealed that lasting victory would demand far more than the capture of a single man. It would require dismantling an entire criminal network designed from its very beginning to survive exactly such setbacks. The next chapter follows that struggle into the courtroom, where years of investigations, testimony, legal argument, and judicial scrutiny ultimately determined which accusations could be transformed into convictions, and which would remain enduring suspicions without sufficient proof under the law. The journey from investigation to courtroom is often imagined as the final and decisive stage of justice. Detectives gather evidence, prosecutors present the facts, judges weigh the arguments, and a verdict ultimately determines guilt or innocence. In many criminal cases, that sequence provides a clear conclusion. Yet the investigations surrounding Luciano Liggio and the Corleonesi demonstrated how different reality could become when organized crime deliberately constructed barriers between those who ordered violence and those who carried it out. The courtroom did not simply become a place where crimes were examined. It became the arena in which every weakness in an investigation, every frightened witness, every missing document, and every indirect chain of communication was subjected to the strict standards of criminal law. The distinction between what investigators believed and what they could legally prove shaped nearly every major proceeding connected to Liggio's organization. Understanding those outcomes requires recognizing that courts operate according to principles fundamentally different from public opinion or investigative suspicion. A criminal conviction requires evidence establishing guilt beyond reasonable doubt, no matter how compelling an overall narrative may appear. Every allegation must be supported by admissible proof capable of surviving careful judicial examination. Organized crime exploited that reality. The Corleonesi did not simply rely upon violence to eliminate opponents. According to the available information, the organization also relied upon indirect communication, compartmentalized operational groups, and the intimidation of witnesses. These methods complicated investigations long before prosecutors ever enter courtroom. By the time cases reached trial, many of the most significant evidentiary challenges had already taken shape. One of the earliest examples appeared during the investigation into the disappearance and presumed murder of Placido Rosado. Authorities identified Luciano Liggio and members of his organization as principal suspects. Investigators collected information they believed connected the Corleonesi to the crime. Arrests followed, creating the expectation that the legal process might finally establish responsibility for one of the earliest major confrontations between law enforcement and the organization. Yet as proceedings advanced, the same obstacle emerged that had frustrated investigators from the beginning. Witnesses remained fearful. Cooperation proved limited. Individuals capable of providing crucial testimony hesitated to speak or declined to participate. Without strong witness evidence capable of reinforcing investigative findings, prosecutors encountered enormous difficulty transforming suspicion into legally sustainable convictions. The courtroom illustrated an essential principle of criminal justice. Arrests alone do not establish guilt. Investigative conclusions, no matter how sincerely held, require corroboration through evidence meeting judicial standards. In the Rosado proceedings, that standard ultimately could not be satisfied in the manner authorities had hoped. The inability to secure definitive legal accountability reflected not necessarily a failure of investigative effort, but the profound consequences of witness intimidation within organized crime investigations. The work of Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa further demonstrated this recurring pattern. As a young Carabinieri captain assigned to investigate Rosado's disappearance, Dalla Chiesa pursued evidence pointing toward Liggio and his associates. His investigation produced arrests and represented one of the earliest determined attempts to confront the Corleonesi through systematic police work. Yet when the legal process demanded direct testimony and evidentiary certainty, fear continued to influence outcomes. Witnesses who might have strengthened the prosecution's case either refused cooperation or proved unable to provide the testimony necessary to satisfy the court. The result was not simply disappointment for investigators. It revealed a structural advantage enjoyed by criminal organizations capable of intimidating entire communities. Every frightened witness weakened the prosecution. Every missing statement reduced the evidentiary foundation upon which criminal liability depended. For Dalla Chiesa, these proceedings underscored a lesson that would remain relevant throughout his career. Successful investigations require more than identifying likely perpetrators. They require evidence strong enough to survive the rigorous procedural safeguards protecting every criminal defendant. That requirement remained essential even when confronting organizations widely believed to have committed serious crimes. Years later, after Dalla Chiesa had become one of Italy's most respected anti-mafia officers, he himself would be assassinated by Cosa Nostra in 1982. Although that killing occurred after Liggio had already been imprisoned and while effective leadership of the Corleonesi had shifted towards Salvatore Riina, Dalla Chiesa's death illustrated the enduring nature of the conflict first revealed during the Rosato investigation. The courtroom victories that investigators sought during those early years remained incomplete, and the organization they pursued continued evolving despite repeated law enforcement efforts. Another important judicial chapter concerned the assassination of Lieutenant Colonel Giuseppe Russo. Russo had devoted his efforts to investigating the Corleonesi and was murdered near Corleone on August 20th, 1977. By that time, Luciano Liggio had already been arrested in Milan in 1974 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Under ordinary circumstances, the incarceration of an organization's leader might have suggested a diminished capacity to direct criminal activity. Yet investigators and prosecutors believed that Liggio retained substantial influence within the Corleonesi even while serving his sentence. According to their assessment, the order leading to Russo's assassination originated from within the organization Liggio had built. Such conclusions reflected years of investigative experience and analysis of the network's operational methods. Nevertheless, the courtroom demanded more than organizational analysis. It required direct evidence establishing personal criminal responsibility. This distinction once again became central to the legal process. Investigators may have concluded that Liggio's influence persisted despite imprisonment, but demonstrating that influence according to judicial standards remained extraordinarily difficult. The organization's reliance upon indirect communication significantly complicated efforts to establish command responsibility. Orders, if given, did not necessarily travel through easily documented channels. Participants performing violent acts often possessed limited direct contact with senior leadership. As a consequence, prosecutors faced substantial obstacles in demonstrating precisely how responsibility flowed through the organization. The Russo investigation therefore reinforced the broader legal challenge confronting anti-mafia authorities. Even when investigators identified convincing patterns of organizational behavior, translating those patterns into legally sufficient evidence against specific leaders remained an exceptionally demanding task. Perhaps no proceeding better illustrates the tension between investigative conviction and judicial proof than the legal aftermath of Judge Cesare Terranova's assassination. Terranova had devoted years to constructing legal cases against Luciano Liggio. His work represented one of the earliest sustained judicial efforts to hold the Corleonesi accountable through formal legal proceedings. By carefully assembling evidence and pursuing prosecutions, he challenged an organization that had repeatedly demonstrated its willingness to eliminate perceived threats. In 1979, Terranova and his bodyguard were murdered. The assassination immediately attracted intense attention because it appeared to strike directly at the judicial system itself. According to cooperating witnesses who later provided testimony, The murder constituted retaliation by the Corleonesi against a judge whose persistent legal efforts threatened the organization. Such testimony appeared consistent with investigators' broader understanding of the network's methods and motivations. Yet once the case entered the courtroom, prosecutors confronted the same evidentiary burden that had characterized earlier proceedings. Cooperating witness testimony formed an important component of the prosecution's presentation. But courts required direct proof establishing Liggio's personal criminal responsibility. After examining the available evidence, the judicial process ultimately reached a conclusion different from the expectations of many investigators. Luciano Liggio was acquitted because the evidence presented did not satisfy the legal standard necessary to establish his guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The acquittal remains one of the most significant legal outcomes associated with Liggio's network, because it illustrates the fundamental principles governing criminal justice. A court does not determine whether an individual appears likely to have benefited from a crime, or whether investigators sincerely believe that person was responsible. Instead, it asks whether the evidence presented proves criminal responsibility according to established legal standards. In Terranova's case, the answer was no. Direct proof connecting Liggio personally to the murder remained insufficient. This outcome did not erase the investigative suspicions surrounding the case, nor did it invalidate the broader understanding authorities had developed concerning the Corleonesi's methods. Rather, it demonstrated that suspicion and proof occupy different places within the justice system. One may guide an investigation. The other determines a criminal verdict. Throughout these proceedings, another recurring theme emerged: the extraordinary importance of witness testimony and the devastating consequences when that testimony became unavailable. Organized crime investigations often depend upon individuals willing to describe meetings, communications, or relationships concealed from public view. When witnesses fear retaliation, prosecutors lose access to evidence that may exist nowhere else. Documents rarely record criminal conspiracies openly. Orders transmitted indirectly leave few permanent traces. Consequently, witness cooperation frequently becomes indispensable. The Corleonesi recognized this reality and, according to the available information, systematically sought to eliminate witnesses or discourage cooperation before testimony could strengthen prosecutions. Every witness who remained silent represented more than one missing statement. Each absence affected the entire structure of a criminal case. Jurors and judges evaluate evidence collectively. Remove one critical piece, and an otherwise persuasive case may no longer satisfy the demanding burden of proof required for conviction. The courtroom therefore became another battlefield in the broader struggle between the Italian state and organized crime. Prosecutors sought to assemble legally sustainable cases despite incomplete evidence. Defense attorneys challenged the reliability, sufficiency, and interpretation of that evidence. Judges ensured that proceedings respected procedural fairness regardless of the seriousness of the allegations. This process occasionally produced outcomes that frustrated investigators or disappointed families seeking accountability. Yet those outcomes also reflected the legal system's refusal to abandon fundamental principles even under extraordinary pressure. Convictions unsupported by sufficient evidence would have undermined the legitimacy of the justice system itself. One of the most significant legal achievements remained Liggio's own imprisonment. After his initial arrest in 1964 and subsequent release because of legal issues, authorities eventually arrested him again on May 16, 1974, in Milan. This second arrest ultimately resulted in a sentence of life imprisonment. The conviction represented years of investigative effort and demonstrated that even powerful mafia leaders could eventually face substantial legal consequences. Nevertheless, Investigators concluded that imprisonment alone did not immediately eliminate Legio's influence within the Corleonesi. The organization continued functioning, with leadership gradually shifting towards Salvatore Riina. This development reinforced another important lesson emerging from the courtroom experience. Prosecuting individual leaders represented an essential component of combating organized crime. But dismantling resilient criminal organizations required broader institutional persistence. A successful conviction removed one figure from active participation. Yet the organizational structure he had created could continue operating if left otherwise intact. By the conclusion of the principal legal proceedings associated with Legio's network, several realities had become unmistakably clear. Investigators had succeeded in exposing important aspects of the Corleonesi's operations. Courts had imposed life imprisonment upon Legio himself. At the same time, several high-profile murders connected to the organization produced acquittals or unresolved questions because direct evidence proved insufficient under criminal law. These outcomes reflected neither complete victory nor complete failure. Instead, they illustrated the extraordinary complexity of prosecuting organized crime within a legal system committed to due process and evidentiary rigor. The courtroom had demonstrated both the strength and the limitations of justice. It could punish proven crimes. It could remove powerful offenders from society. But it could not substitute suspicion for proof, no matter how compelling the surrounding circumstances appeared. That commitment to legal principle remained essential, even as the conflict with organized crime continued beyond the walls of the courtroom. Although Luciano Legio would spend the remainder of his life in prison, the organization he helped build had already developed the capacity to survive him. Leadership continued to evolve, violence persisted, and the struggle between the Italian state and the Corleonesi entered an even more dangerous chapter. The final part of this story explores that legacy, examining how Legio's network became the foundation for future waves of violence, how the cost of resistance continued to be measured in human lives, and why the investigators, officers, prosecutors, and judges who confronted this organization remained central to understanding Italy's long fight against organized crime. When Luciano Legio was sentenced to life imprisonment, it would have been understandable to believe that one of the darkest chapters in the history of the Corleonesi had reached its conclusion. For investigators who had spent years pursuing him, for prosecutors who had worked tirelessly to transform fragmented evidence into legally sustainable cases, and for judges determined to preserve the authority of the law, his imprisonment represented an undeniable achievement. It demonstrated that even one of the most influential mafia leaders in Sicily could eventually be brought before the courts and removed from society. Yet the years that followed revealed an unsettling truth. The greatest legacy of Legio was not simply the crimes attributed to his own period of leadership. It was the organizational structure he created, one capable of surviving the imprisonment of its founder and continuing its activities under new leadership. According to the available information, Legio's network became the foundation upon which the Corleonesi expanded its influence during the following decade. The younger men who had once served within his organization were no longer merely associates, carrying out assignments. They had become the next generation of leadership. Among them, Salvatore Riina emerged as the dominant figure. The transition did not require the organization to reinvent itself. The operational methods already existed. Independent groups continued to function. Indirect communication remained an important means of protecting senior leadership. Witness intimidation persisted as a central defensive strategy. The organizational culture Legio had fostered proved durable enough to outlive his direct participation. In many respects, this continuity represented one of the most troubling lessons learned by Italian investigators. Arresting a leader however significant, did not automatically dismantle the institution that leader had spent years constructing. Criminal organizations differ from ordinary criminal partnerships because they often survive changes. In leadership, responsibilities shift, influence evolves, and new figures assume command while preserving the existing structure. For authorities confronting the Corleonesi, that reality meant the struggle could not end with one successful prosecution. It required sustained institutional commitment extending across generations of investigators, prosecutors, judges, and police officers. The available information identifies Legio's organization as the foundation for the Corleoneses' rise during the 1980s. Under the leadership that followed, the organization intensified its campaign against the Italian state. The violence no longer remained confined to isolated confrontations involving local investigations. Instead, it expanded into a broader conflict marked by repeated attacks against representatives of public institutions. Judges became targets. Prosecutors became targets. Police officers became targets. Members of the Carabinieri continued to become targets. The pattern that had begun during earlier decades did not disappear. Rather, it evolved into an even more extensive campaign directed against those responsible for enforcing the law. Looking back across the incidents explored throughout this story, a consistent thread becomes visible. Placido Rosado represented one of the earliest individuals whose disappearance brought determined investigative attention to the Corleonesi. Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa embodied the persistence of the Carabinieri as they attempted to expose those responsible despite enormous obstacles. Giuseppe Russo demonstrated that officers investigating the organization remained vulnerable even after its founder had been imprisoned. Judge Cesare Terranova illustrated the risks faced by members of the judiciary who attempted to transform investigative findings into legal accountability. These individuals occupied different positions within society. Their careers unfolded across different decades. Yet each became connected through the same continuing struggle between organized crime and the institutions of democratic government. Their stories also reveal another important truth. Organized crime is often remembered through the names of its leaders because those individuals appear prominently in headlines, court proceedings, and historical accounts. Luciano Legio's name occupies an important place in the history of the Sicilian Mafia because of the influence he exercised over the Corleonesi and the organizational legacy he left behind. Yet focusing exclusively upon criminal leaders risks obscuring the contributions of those who opposed them. Behind every investigation stood police officers willing to pursue difficult evidence despite repeated setbacks. Behind every prosecution stood legal professionals committed to presenting cases even when witness intimidation threatened their success. Behind every judicial decision stood judges tasked with balancing the pursuit of justice against the demanding evidentiary standards required by law. Their work rarely produced immediate victories. Progress often occurred gradually, interrupted by setbacks, legal challenges, and acts of violence. Nevertheless, their persistence formed an essential part of Italy's long struggle against organized crime. One of the most striking features of this history is the recurring distinction between investigative belief and judicial proof. Throughout the cases associated with Legio's network, investigators frequently developed strong suspicions concerning the organization's responsibility for particular crimes. They identified patterns, examined motives, reconstructed relationships, and assembled evidence suggesting broader organizational involvement. Courts, however, required something more specific. Every allegation demanded proof capable of satisfying the legal standard of guilt beyond reasonable doubt. This distinction occasionally resulted in acquittals where investigators believed responsibility nevertheless existed. The assassination of Judge Cesare Terranova provides one of the clearest examples. Cooperating witnesses described the killing as retaliation connected to Liggio's earlier prosecutions. Yet direct evidence sufficient to establish Liggio's personal criminal liability remained unavailable. Consequently, he was acquitted. Such outcomes may appear frustrating, particularly when viewed through the emotional lens of tragic crimes and devastated families. Yet they also demonstrate the importance of preserving judicial integrity even in the face of organized violence. A legal system that abandons evidentiary standards when confronting dangerous criminals risks undermining the very principles it seeks to defend. The challenge confronting Italy's justice system therefore extended beyond defeating organized crime. It required defeating organized crime without sacrificing the rule of law itself. Equally significant was the role of fear throughout this history. Violence achieved more than the immediate elimination of individual targets. It influenced the decisions of countless others who observed the consequences of cooperation with authorities. Witnesses hesitated before speaking. Communities became reluctant to provide information. Every successful act of intimidation strengthened the protective silence surrounding the organization. According to the available information, Liggio's network systematically sought to eliminate witnesses whenever indications emerged that they might assist investigators. This strategy multiplied the impact of every crime. A single murder could discourage dozens of future witnesses. An unresolved investigation could reinforce the belief that resistance carried unacceptable risks. In this way, fear became a form of social control, extending far beyond the immediate victims of violence. Yet fear alone does not fully define this history. Running alongside intimidation is another recurring theme: persistence. The disappearance of Placido Rosado did not end official investigations into the Corleonesi. The legal difficulties encountered by Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa did not persuade investigators to abandon future inquiries. The murders of Giuseppe Russo and Cesare Terranova did not bring the judicial system to a halt. Every attack imposed terrible human costs, but the institutions confronting organized crime continued their work. New investigators inherited unfinished cases. New prosecutors built upon earlier legal efforts. The struggle evolved, adapted, and continued despite repeated losses. This persistence represents one of the most significant aspects of the story because it reminds us that institutions, like criminal organizations, can also possess continuity. While the Corleonesi sought to preserve its structure through secrecy and intimidation, the Italian state sought to preserve its own institutions through lawful investigation, prosecution, and judicial process. The conflict therefore became not merely a contest between individuals, but between competing systems of authority. Luciano Liggio himself never witnessed the final evolution of the organization he had helped create. According to the available information, he died in prison in 1993 after suffering a heart attack. His death marked the end of his personal role in the history of the Corleonesi, but did not erase the impact of his earlier decisions. By then, the organization had already developed into a far more powerful and violent force than it had been during the beginning of his leadership. The network he established had become the basis for the Corleonesi's later dominance within Cosa Nostra and for the intensified campaign against representatives of the Italian state during the 1980s. History therefore remembers Liggio not solely because of the crimes associated with his own period of influence, but because he helped construct the organizational framework that allowed later leaders to expand the scale of violence dramatically. That legacy serves as a reminder that the consequences of organized crime often extend well beyond the lifetime of any individual participant. Institutions, methods, and cultures established by one generation can continue shaping events long after their founders have disappeared. As this story comes to a close, it is worth returning to the phrase that introduced our journey. Carabinieri Killer, Luciano Liggio Network. At first glance, the expression appears to describe one notorious murder case. In reality, it represents something much broader. It reflects decades of confrontation between one criminal organization and those determined to uphold the law. It encompasses disappearances, investigations, assassinations, courtroom proceedings, and the continuing effort to establish accountability despite extraordinary obstacles. It reminds us that history is rarely defined by one dramatic event alone. More often, it is shaped by a succession of decisions made by individuals on opposing sides of a long and difficult conflict. Luciano Liggio built a network intended to survive arrests, silence witnesses, and shield its leadership from legal responsibility. Investigators, carabinieri officers, prosecutors, and judges responded by continuing their work despite intimidation, despite incomplete evidence, and despite the knowledge that success might place their own lives in danger. Some paid the ultimate price. Others lived long enough to witness only partial victories. Few saw a complete resolution. That unfinished quality is perhaps the most honest conclusion this story can offer. Organized crime is rarely defeated through one investigation or one trial. Progress arrives gradually, often measured in years rather than months, and sometimes in generations rather than careers. The individuals remembered throughout this episode, Placido Rosado, Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, Giuseppe Russo, and Cesare Terranova, occupied different places within that history. Yet together, they represent the enduring human cost of defending justice against organized violence. Their experiences remind us that behind every legal proceeding lies a personal story. Behind every criminal investigation stands someone willing to pursue difficult truths. And behind every historical account of organized crime are the lives of those who refuse to surrender to fear. Luciano Liggio died in prison in 1993, but the questions raised by the conflicts surrounding his network continue to resonate far beyond his lifetime. They ask how democratic institutions respond when confronted by organizations built upon secrecy and intimidation. They ask how justice can function when witnesses are silenced before they speak. Most importantly, they remind us that the rule of law depends not only upon legislation and courts, but upon ordinary individuals willing to uphold those institutions despite extraordinary risks. Their courage may not always produce immediate victories, and the legal record may not answer every question left by history. But their persistence remains one of the defining reasons why the struggle against organized crime continued long after the network Luciano Liggio created first declared its war against justice.